Excellent. And can everybody see me? And how bad do I look? Nobody looks amazing anymore. So good morning, everyone. I want to welcome you all to the first of what we hope will be a series on teaching STEM education online. Right now, as we all know around the world, we've been forced to move to distance education in a rather unprepared manner. We have been very worried about making sure we can even continue education. And now that we think we've got the continuing education part down, let's see if we can start making it better. The problem with STEM education, as I'm sure you know, is that it's a touch more hands-on than education in other areas. For instance, if you're doing work in literature, you read the material, and that's easy to copy and put in other people's hands. Not always, but generally speaking. It's harder to replicate a physics experiment with blocks going down a slope. Thinking back to my own physics courses as an undergrad, in the same way. Videos do not share the nuance in the same way. So what we would like to do is help provide better solutions to STEM educators around the world who've been suddenly forced into this. So this is the first of the series. We're calling it More Questions and Answers in Online Assessment and Evaluation. I'm presenting it. My name is James Howard. This is the team, as you can see on the left-hand side, in charge of putting this together. As you can see, we're spread around Italy, Canada, and the United States. We are hoping to do weekly webinars on Mondays from 11 to 1. I think the 2 hours sounds optimistic, but we're going to see how it works out today. The way this is going to be set up is the first hour is going to be a presentation with slides, and then the second hour is going to be open to any question and answer, and it's meant to be a little more freeform, although we're going to try to help freeform but structured. These should not be strictly questions to me or to the rest of the team, but rather if you want to answer, if people have answers from among other viewers, we want to make sure that anybody can get an answer, or give an answer rather. So very briefly about me, my day job is I'm a data scientist. My work is basically in predictive modeling, creating statistical models to predict the future. I'm reasonably good at it. But as I say here at night, I become a superhero, and that's the math evangelist. I've been teaching mathematics and statistics online for UMGC, that's University of Maryland Global Campus, previously known as University of Maryland University College, since about 2010. I teach, and I teach introductory level mathematics courses. We don't have anything higher than Calc 2. So I'm teaching to students who are taking these introductory courses. Some of them, for instance, college algebra is essentially a high school level course. Intro to Stats is the freshman stats course that you'd expect. Pre-calculus is the same pre-calculus you would expect from high school, and calculus and Calc 2 are exactly the courses you would expect them to be. In many cases, my students here have not done very well. In the past with mathematics, it's very common for me to hear words at the beginning of the term or throughout the term that my students are afraid of math. Math has never been their friend. They don't like math. I'm not trying to fix that. I'm just trying to get them through the course. I would like to be able to fix it, but in most cases, that's just not feasible. In addition, I have also been an adjunct in public management teaching research methods to graduate students at Central Michigan University in Penn State. So that's my background. I hope to share some of my own issues with evaluation and assessment. Now, the first issue I'm going to have with evaluation and assessment starts with the fact that these are two different words, and they are often used interchangeably, but they're not always interchangeable. I have, in fact, while we were developing this presentation last week, the question of, am I talking about evaluation or am I talking about assessment, became a huge question among our team, because I had been using them interchangeably. And that was not very good of me. So then I decided to come in and develop this slide to really bring that issue to a head. We note that assessment and evaluation, when they are distinguished, generally assessment is task-oriented, individualized, diagnostic, and informative. One of the other words we like to use is process-based. What we really want to do is find the ability to understand where a person is at a given point in their education. In a lot of ways, what we do with assessment is we figure out where a student is in the process of teaching them, often at the beginning, certainly throughout a term. We try to figure out where they are. We also have this idea of evaluation. It's goal-oriented. It's standards-based. We want to be able to compare somebody against a standard standard, what's the word I'm looking for? Rubric against their what they have accomplished. For instance, we would expect a student who has finished Calculus 1 to be able to differentiate most basic functions. Those are the standards we're going to be holding them against. It's also formative, and it's normative. So what we do is when we have all those evaluations, we put all of our students kind of in order of how they have completed a course. And in that way, evaluation is product oriented. So one of the things that I have been using as a shortcut to think about this is evaluation is the grade at the end of the semester, holistic view of a student's achievement in a course and what they have learned. And assessment is an evaluation of what they know at a given point. Now, the two things that are huge that assessment and evaluation have together is that they're both criteria driven and evidence-based, because we use evidence-based mechanisms for doing both assessment and evaluation. Tests, for instance, are something that we all know is a good evidence-based system for measurement. We also make sure they're criteria-driven. We want to be able to ensure that a person is being evaluated against a standard set of things or assessed against a standard set of things. It won't necessarily be the same between assessment and evaluation, but the idea that both are criteria-driven should be pushing hard on this. So with that distinction made, what we're really going to be talking about is not so much assessment or evaluation, but the idea of criteria-driven and evidence-based assessment and evaluation. We want to talk about the overlapping piece, because that's the hard part in online education. So what we have is the problem. And for the rest of this lecture, I'm going to be using the term assessment to mean, generally speaking, both. We keep assessment as the one term throughout this presentation until we actually mean evaluation. But generally speaking, everything I'm going to say applies directly to evaluation as well. So when we talk about evaluation, when we talk about assessment, we want to know, how do we do it? And in order to understand how we do it, we need to ask ourselves four basic questions. And this is where we get into this whole philosophy of education piece. Why do we do assessment? Why do we do grading? Why are we teaching, and why are we learning? These are all things that we want to be able to figure out, and that helps us frame the assessment question. We want to do assessment in order to prepare for grading. But the problem is, then why do we do grading? And that is so that we have some idea of where a student stands at the end of the term. Did they learn something? Do they know something? Are they ready to go on to the next level? And that gets us to both the question of the purpose of teaching and the purpose of learning. And that's where we start to get into the individualized pieces that are well above the threshold of what we're talking about today. As we like to say in the United States, that's above my pay grade. So first I want to begin with some of these technology platforms. One of the things that I've learned in the past few days is that while in the United States, we generally have technology platforms purchased by our schools and ready to go, that's not necessarily always the case outside the United States. For me, even going back to when I was an undergrad, starting in 1998, I had portions of courses that were held online. For instance, a course was an otherwise normal course, but quizzes were done online. And that was not necessarily unusual for me at the time. But I look back on it now and realize, that was somewhat groundbreaking at the time that we just had this small component done this way. But some of the big platforms we see out there are Blackboard, Desire to Learn, and Moodle. You've probably heard of all these. There's also others like Sakai and Canvas. And these things all have something in common. They provide some sort of scheduling mechanism, such as a calendar or the ability to tell students when things are due. There's some sort of discussion board. There's a document submission system, and what that looks like will vary from system to system. And there's some sort of test system. And when I say elementary test system here, we've kind of decided that Blackboard is kind of the lowest common denominator here, in that Blackboard offers a very simple testing system. It's not very powerful, and it doesn't have a lot of flexibility to it, but it does exist, and we can do other things with it and try to present some sort of elementary test to students. For instance, in some of my courses, I use it to give a very simple quiz to my students, and that's more of a quiz to background check what they picked up. Did you read the material, or at least did you need to read the material? Let's be honest, some of my students go and take the quiz without reading it, and sometimes you can do just fine. The idea of the discussion board. If you want to talk a little bit about history here, there were some very early attempts to do online education going back to the 70s. And this all kind of sprung out of the University of Michigan with what was called the Confer system. And even today, you can see the effects of the Confer system still in these discussion board platforms. They've all been constructed using the same basic format. Now, in one sense, it's because that same basic format is the easiest way to do it. But in another way, it kind of also shows that there hasn't been much original thinking put into this in now 40 years. So when it comes to these technology platforms, there's good news. They already exist. You don't have to go out and install them yourself, typically. If your school has it, it's been standardized across the school. You get technical support from the IT department, and it's ready to use if your school has bought it. Now, there is one issue here that we've also been discussing, and that is the idea that technical support is often not very good at your school. At one of the schools I teach at, and I will not name names on this one, I have never had a good experience with calling the IT department when I had a problem. And I'm sure I'm not the only one in that boat. Hopefully sometimes you get a good experience teaching, a good experience with your IT department. And there's another IT department where I've never had a bad experience. So it varies from school to school, and it's going to depend on your own experiences and sometimes what your needs are. There's some bad news in all of this too. When your school has picked a technology platform, they've picked one based on the school's criteria. And that's going to be things like cost, deployability, familiarity with whoever the decider was, and sometimes there's a faculty committee helping make a recommendation. But that recommendation is going to be coming from the short experiences of all those people on the committee. And what you end up with is a system which is at best one size fits some. Blackboard is really helpful for doing some kinds of courses. Desire to Learn works really well for other kinds of courses. Moodle works very well for distance learning courses. Or I'm sorry, not for distance learning, for self-paced courses. Canvas works very well for, in my experience, for case courses which are being reused frequently. And then Sakai is not helpful in any circumstance. Excuse me. So with that in mind, you're going to be stuck with whatever your department's given you. There are also some other things. If you don't have one, the one thing you can do is go to what's called Google Classroom. It's available for free. It's obviously a product of Google. You can put together a simple class in just a few minutes. It's not going to have anywhere near the features you're hoping for, but it will have some very basics and help you run a class right now. There are two other sources of tools we want to talk about. One is OER, Open Educational Resources. And this has been a big deal for 5 5, maybe 10 years now, the push for open educational resources. The push for open educational resources stems, as we know, remember, from the fact that educational material is so expensive. Textbooks are expensive. Online material provided by textbook makers, publishers, is also expensive. So there's plenty of OER out there, especially in mathematics. But that means a couple things. One, you get what you pay for. Sometimes this material is of lower quality. Sometimes it is not exactly very well proofread. Sometimes you end up with material where you're sitting there going, I don't understand. Even as the instructor, I don't understand how they're trying to teach this. Another problem with OER resources is that they're usually expository. It's very easy to get yourself an open textbook on calculus. There are many of these out there on the internet right now that you can download and use for free with, no questions asked. But they don't come with testing tools. They don't come with, sometimes they don't even come with homework problems. They don't come with any of the things that you need to complete a course, just the textbook. Now, it turns out that's probably better, because if there were OER tools for tests, it's going to take 5 minutes for somebody to take a copy of that test and post an answer sheet somewhere. So that's one of the problems with creating OER testing materials and OER evaluation materials. We don't have those happening. Finally, I did want to bring up one other class of tool that's not listed on this slide, and that is the idea that you can, for lack of a better way of putting it, hijack tools that were not meant to be used as educational tools into your classroom. I know of one professor who had to put an operations research course online in a hurry, and she is now using Google Forms to use her quizzes. It's quick and easy. It gives you results as a spreadsheet that you can download and put into a gradebook. In fact, since I mentioned that to our development team here, I found out she's not the only one doing that. Google Forms has become a very adaptable tool for doing quick evaluation tools and quick assessment tools. There are other tools you might be able to use if you wish to. One of the ones I've been exploring is using Jupyter notebooks, where you create an assignment inside of a Jupyter notebook and then give it to a student to complete. Now, the problem with that is, if that Jupyter notebook is based on R or Python, the student has to be well versed in R or Python to complete it. Whereas looking, like I said, at my student base, I've had one student ever in one of my stats courses who knew R at all coming in, and none, I think, who were really very well versed in Python. So for my students, that wouldn't even be a helpful tool, because they need to learn how to use the tool before they get to there. Now, for a higher level course, those sorts of tools would be entirely appropriate, because you're going to be giving a course to a student in, say, some sort of data science or even operations research. They're going to have a background in statistics at that point, and calculus, and know the basics. And hopefully, if they're doing those sorts of things, they've actually had some basic programming too. And since more and more basic programming is happening in Python, doing Python within Jupyter Notebook will be somewhat familiar to them. So when you're looking at these tools, don't be afraid of adapting something you've got out there or have found, if it can provide you with the service you need. So with that in mind, we also want to talk about discussion and participation, because we like to have course participation, and specifically discussion, as part of our teaching. And the reason we like this is because it can help promote engagement, and it gives immediate feedback to the instructor. When you're standing in front of a classroom and you're teaching, a student can say something like, oh, well, what if I did this? And you've either, they're right and they've learned something because they figure out how to cross-apply the method, or they've said something that is not helpful or not right, and then that gives you the ability to help them work their way through where they went wrong. That is why we encourage discussion in physical classrooms. And the problem when we try to take discussion to an online classroom is that we lose that immediate feedback. it suddenly becomes it becomes necessarily asynchronous. My students are based around the world. So I have questions being emailed to me while I'm asleep. I have questions being emailed to me while I'm online. I have questions being emailed to me while I'm sitting in the car. I have questions being emailed to me all the time. And I have discussion posts being posted all the time. So it's necessarily asynchronous, but it does help promote engagement. It does give students the ability to talk to you and to talk to others. One of the other nice things, and we often don't think about this in mathematics, is it helps support writing skills. There has been a large push for the past several years about writing across the curriculum. We want to encourage writing exercises at every level and in every class. We should probably be doing the same thing with math, doing mathematics across the curriculum, but that's another issue entirely. But we want to help support those writing skills, and having students write in a in that sort of outlet gives them the opportunity to express mathematical ideas in a way analogous to the way they would have to in a professional setting. Now, one of the things I'll say about writing skills is I've had students come to me and complain in the past when they were graded on their writing ability, saying this is a math class, they shouldn't be graded on writing, to which I would say it was in the syllabus. I think that's the professor mantra. There are two ways I have seen discussion done in online mathematics classrooms. One is kind of this idea of a problem of the week. And the way we do a problem of the week in kind of the standard classroom at the University of Maryland is that each student will select a problem and do it, for lack of a better way, on the board. In this case, it's they go through and solve the problem as a discussion post, and then it gets graded on how well they did it, was the work shown, did they get the right answer, all these basic things. And it's very rare the students interact with each other in this environment. Sometimes they do, but it's inconsistent even when they do. You'll have one student who maybe responds once to go, oh, hey, that really helped me, or something like that. But generally speaking, you don't get a lot of cross-student interaction that way. In another way, and I think that this is much easier to pull off in an upper level class or graduate level class, is an applications question. So you ask the student, this week we're learning about derivatives. How can you use derivatives to, in the real world? How can you use them in your kitchen? What does a derivative mean when you're driving a car? And obviously, as you're driving your car, the first derivative of your velocity is your acceleration. That's something we think about all the time, but is not necessarily something, I hope we think about that all the time, that's not necessarily something your students are going to be aware of. So what you do is you give them the question, how do you use derivatives how do we use derivatives to in the real world? And asking a student to do that, they're encouraged to think about it. And I'm very happy to say that I expect my students to go and Google and say, how do I use derivatives in my kitchen? They're going to get something they find somebody else wrote, but they're going to have to sit down and reinterpret that in a meaningful way. So hopefully, as part of an application style of discussion, then when it comes to assessing it, we got to talk about things like application fit, the quality of the arguments, and this is a writing issue here, is how well do they frame the question that this is a fit. It's not always going to be it's not always going to be a good fit. And even sometimes your students will acknowledge this isn't a great fit, but I think there might be a thing here, in which case, that's fine. There's also this question of writing quality, which I discussed before. We do want to support writing, of course, around mathematical ideas, especially because as students go into the real world, at some point they're going to have to look at a spreadsheet and interpret it in a meaningful way. So their ability to understand these ideas and convey them in a meaningful way becomes important. Between these two mechanisms, I don't see a lot of other possibility for discussion participation, because obviously, even when you have some varieties of these, they essentially become an applications question or the problem of the week. And finding something that really can get a student moving and motivated is very difficult. I have found the problem of the week is never motivating. And with respect to applications, sometimes it can be very motivating, but only if you've got a student who really wants to take on the question. This leads us to another form of assessment as testing. There are, as we think, approximately 4 different ways to give a student a test. One is you basically give them the test. It's a take-home test, and they do it on the honor system. We trust that they do not, go and seek outside help. We hope that they won't. But in this case, it's very difficult to ask the question, how is this different from homework? In many ways, the only real difference is the test is cumulative and covers more material and more diverse material, whereas we typically give students homework that is relevant to what they've been working on the past few days or the week or whatever. Honor system tests have all the flaws you'd expect of them, and assessing a student using these can be questionable. There's the idea of proctored exams. We used to use proctored exams when I started at UMBC, and the problem with proctored exams is students must find a suitable proctor. One of the things that some students would use, because many of our students are military, finding an officer who's willing to say they monitor the student, proctor the student during the exam, and sign off on it was no big deal. But for other students, it became much, much more difficult to find somebody who was readily available. A professor at a university near them, but if they had the ability to find that professor, it's not normal for, people in a course like that to be able to have access to that sort of person. There's also the idea of what we call online proctored exams. And these are where you have a student do the test at a laptop, and there's some software that can basically lock a laptop down and keep somebody from really doing anything with it, except the test. And then they have the camera on them the whole time, and they're basically being monitored. Now, there are a number of ways that can be subverted, such as students with multiple. For instance, I have right here a cell phone that you can't see on camera because it's telling me what time it is and how much time I've got left in this presentation, to make sure I keep at a reasonable pace. I also have another laptop right here, in addition to the laptop controlling this, and this is all out of frame for you right now. So, if this is what I've set up just to get through this presentation, imagine how you might do it with a testing situation. Another possibility is that there can be a third-party testing agency. If you've ever been through, for instance, a certification exam, such as the PMP, Project Management Professional exam, you've gone to a company like Prometric, which administers the exam on behalf of PMI. That's the sort of thing I'm talking about here, is where your school partners with that third-party agency, and the third-party agency delivers the testing material to the student and ensures that there's no cheating and the student performs the test in a proper environment, and hopefully that they do it correctly. The problem with this is I'm not aware of any universities actively doing it. When I did look for this, I did find an organization, a company that does provide this service, but there are issues here where if you have the student paying for it, there's an issue of conflict of interest, because then while a third-party agency might benefit from paying the student and then going ahead and letting them anyway take the test in an appropriate environment. And then if the school partners with that agency, they need to partner with one that provides services to the entire breadth of students they have. So there are issues with that, and we need to, if we want to adopt that sort of third-party agency for testing, doing that can be at best difficult. Finally, or not even finally here, I want to discuss rubrics. Nothing here is going to be specific to online education, but I do want to say a couple things to make sure that we're on top of this. The word rubric scares people in a lot of ways. It's just a scorecard for assessment. when you do them, think SMART goals, and I'm as guilty of the next person of not doing this, but they should be, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. Obviously, when you have a course that's a semester long, the time bounding is obvious, but the rest is, can something specific? Is it measurable? Is it achievable? Can the student actually do this? And is it relevant? Is it something we actually need to be grading on? The other point that I really want to make about this is that these assessment categories, because frequently we create rubrics that are, for lack of a better way of putting it, two-dimensional. It's a grid. And, we give them a score, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we have multiple categories of, was work shown, grammar correct, yada, yada, yada. And if we do that, we want to make sure that those categories, those various assessment categories, are orthogonal to each other. We want to make sure that if a student does something that costs them points in one category, it would not obviously also cost them points in another category. So that if they make one class of mistake, it would not affect them across the board. Because if we have to take away points from a student in multiple places, then at that point it becomes a more crushing tool and not one to really help them learn. The other thing about rubrics is they need to be available at the beginning of the course. You need to make sure that your students know what they're being graded against and how they're going to be graded from the get-go. They won't read it, but that's okay. At least you tried. So with all the difficulties associated with testing, it might be interesting to look at alternatives to testing. For these, we have collaborative learning. We want students to work together. Now, if students are going to work together, we want them to be able to communicate properly and in a meaningful way. So in today's world, that might be a small group discussion board in your online classroom. It could be through Zoom, as we're sitting here today ourselves. It can be through a lot of different mechanisms. Now, one of the nice things about collaborative learning is it allows peer assessment, because we can often use peer assessment as a part of an overall evaluation, because we want to see how students view each other. Students often have a better grasp of what their fellow students understand when they're in small group settings. And being able to use the peer assessment has given us the ability to recognize who understood what within a group and how they contributed to the group overall. Now, the downside of these sorts of collaborative projects is that they have all the problems of group work in the real, in a physical classroom. You'll have one student who really doesn't know what they're doing, skips all the meetings. You'll have another student who doesn't contribute in any meaningful way. You also have other sorts of problems with group dynamics. For instance, you might have competing ideas that are never really resolved. You might have fractious leadership. You can have all sorts of problems, especially because we know that with group work in particular, especially in STEM courses, female students tend to withhold more and male students tend to be dominating, and we do not want to support that. So if we can find a way to provide group work and allow for general and equal participation that specifically promotes minority views and gender-based views, we also want to be able to find ways to promote group work that encourages everyone to participate in a meaningful way. These are problems we have in the real world too, and we're going to see these problems morph in an online classroom, especially because we now know that online people are a little less restrained, as we might know from, say, Twitter and Facebook, and our friends, and the very foolish things they often say to each other when they think no one's paying attention there. Another option we have is project-based learning. Now, project-based learning is probably my favorite way of doing this in both a classroom set, both a physical classroom and an online classroom. And one of the reasons I like this is it can be tailored to a student's interests and needs. You can give a broad topic and ask people, or give people a broad spectrum of objectives and ask people to find a topic, ask your students to find a topic that interests them. For instance, if your students are very interested in, I'm trying to think of a really good example here. My son, he's 10 years old, right? If I were to give him a question, ask him to write a paper on any topic and say, I have to meet these goals. It would come back with either Star Wars or Pokemon, right? And that's fine, because those are the things that interest him. As long as he meets the objectives, he learns how to apply things correctly. I don't care what world he's applying them in. I just care that he learns to apply these ideas. And your students can do the same thing inside this environment. One of my research methods classes, a student was very interested in seeing how the development of a mall near them was going to affect things. So they used that as the focus of what they were writing about. I had another student write about the building of the Hoover Dam, because they were very interested in that. For whatever reason, it captured their attention. When you give, and all they had to do was write a paper, within, as a standard graduate level paper in a research methods course. So, it's like 10 to 15 pages of a basic analysis. To find things that really interest a student and capture their attention is very helpful. And then once you have given them something like that, it helps them work through the problem in a way that matters to them. And this gives them the opportunity to explore and the opportunity to really see things in a way that benefits them. Now, the nice thing about project-based learning is it can be graded like any other project. I've had classes where basically every student was given the same project and said, do X. And, in that case, you have to, your assessment looks like, well, does this look like everyone else's? Did you come up with the right answer for part A and the right answer for part B and the right answer for part C? That does make, for project-based learning, you have to read papers and figure out what a student did. And that can be more difficult that way. Now, the cheating problem, we've touched on some already. And this is a real problem. I have seen in my online classrooms it be especially difficult. I had a situation, it must have been 2017, 3 years ago, when out of a course of like 25 students, and this was a basic college algebra course, out of 25 students or so, 6 of them had copied the answers for a particular quiz off of, I believe it came from Course Hero at the time. The quiz was posted right after it was given. Somebody filled out the answers online, and then people bought the answers and downloaded them. And the reason and the only reason I really caught it in this case is because I had 2 students in the order that they were being graded, which was probably alphabetical. They didn't even change the presentation. And I was looking at this going, there's a peculiar error that was on the, that was in the uploaded version. That was, as I was looking at this error going, this is a very odd mistake to make. And then I caught 2 papers, which both had made the same, or 2 quiz submissions, both of which had the same mistake and were identically formatted. And I thought to myself, well, that ain't right. And I looked at the 2 of them side by side, and it was quite clear it was the same thing. And then after a little bit more, I went through and said, I've seen this error before. And I went through and looked at all the others, and I noticed that they were all identical too. There'd been some effort to change the presentation, but it was quite clear they all came from the same source. And of the 6 students out of 25 I caught on that one, most of them I ended up catching. I went back over all of their work to date and caught that they'd been doing this all along, and even found some of their own posts on Course Hero and found that one of them had also been cheating at other courses. I mean, this was, for lack of a better way of putting it, a cheating scandal. And this was a real problem. Now, all of that gets turned over to the university administration, and they do whatever it is they do with it. So that is a reason to be cautious. I mean, if this is this common, and I know what's happening in my other courses, I just don't have the ability to prove it quite so easily as I did that time. I've caught it in other cases too, but this time it was it would have been bad if I didn't catch it. Um, One of the things that I also have happening in my online classroom is I have students who really don't show ever. They don't participate, they don't turn anything in. They come into the classroom, but they never, and because I can see access records, but they never actually do anything. I have this every term, and we've always theorized that these people are actually um, the ones who are providing solutions to others. But we've never really been clear on who we call them the ghost students, who they are and what they're doing there. Um, Another problem we have across, and this happens across all fields, is the idea of impersonation. And this is one of two things: students can buy papers, or there's even bespoke paper writing services. Specifically with regard to buying papers, I was trying to find a source on something just the other day, and ended up finding I was being directed to buy a paper about the same thing I was trying to write about. And I'm just, that's not helpful. And I'm like, why is this here? So you're going to see that those uh, prepared papers are readily available over the internet, and they're out there all the time. This is no different than what we saw a generation ago, where, for instance, a campus fraternity or something like that would have a stack of papers on hand for a student who needed one, for a member who needed one. It's just that now the market is global. And because the market is global, there are also bespoke paper writing services. I've even had people come to me and try to hire me to do this. I've always said no. Good to know. But in this, it's you have a student goes out and they pay by the word, or they pay by the page for a paper that has never been read before. So you can't really, find a copy of it online to prove that they cheated. And that can be a real problem. Now there are ways to detect this, and that's Turnitin. And there's similar sources as well, but Turnitin's kind of the 500-pound gorilla in the cheating detection. But here's a problem: is that Turnitin doesn't work in math, because often, if my students' answers don't look roughly similar to everyone else's, there's a problem, because you want them to be using roughly the same approach and roughly the same way to get the same answer. Um, in addition, Turnitin just does not speak mathematical formula in a meaningful way. And given the diversity of ways mathematics can be written online, and I even have a question about that, which we're going to get back to, that's a real concern. So when I ended up finding the original, the source paper for the cheating scandal I discussed, I did it by Googling some of the raw text in the source quiz, and chasing it down, because if you have some arbitrary sentence, it turns out 7-8 words, there's only going to be a handful of times that sentence ever appears anywhere. And sure enough, it led me straight to Course Hero and a solution set. There's also a problem where we end up with, and I'm calling this privacy risks, but it goes far beyond that. Your university is going to have privacy policies about how you can share information, who you can share information with, and what kinds of student information are available. Now, all those are going to be roughly the same, but let's face it, they're all pretty reasonable. The bigger concern I see when it comes to some of these things have to do with national level laws. In the United States, we have FERPA, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. And the EU has GDPR, which I cannot remember what that stands for right now. GDPR came up as a problem for us in our discussions last week, when we asked, can we even do online proctoring with a video camera like situation with a laptop camera under GDPR? And this has become a real, or can you use can you use Google Forms to deliver a quiz outside of the university's provided framework without violating GDPR or FERPA? And while FERPA is specifically aimed at the education market, and every teacher at every level in the United States should have at least a vague awareness of what's going on with FERPA. In the EU, GDPR has suddenly become a frontline issue for instructors, and they're not prepared for that. And so when you have these issues, you've got to consult with your university's lawyers or ethicists, or however you make decisions based on your framework. And another issue that I see personally is, can you prove cheating? Now, going back to my cheating scandal I was just talking about, in one case, I really could not prove that one of the students had been involved. I strongly suspected, and I was convinced of it, but I wasn't able to prove it. And in the end, I ended up going ahead with the accusations and turning them over to the department, and said it's on them at this point. That's their problem, not mine. But here's the thing: a misconduct accusation can damage a student forever. Now, there's also the question of whether or not we should let that kind of misconduct accusation damage a student forever. They should be allowed to learn from their mistakes. But at the same time, if you have falsely or incorrectly accused, let's not use falsely because that implies it was done intentionally. If you've incorrectly accused a student of this kind of misconduct, that can haunt them forever in a way that is not beneficial to you or them. So, I mean, when you have these, just be cautious when you have these issues, because it's going to be a real problem as we try to figure out our way to do these assessments in this post-COVID-19 world. So I'm a little bit ahead of schedule, Mina. I hope you're okay with that. I do want to address the first question that just came in. And it actually came in about half an hour ago. And it comes from Avi, who says, how do you get around the whole typing math thing, particularly for beginning undergrads who don't know any LaTeX? And that's a great question. And what I'm going to begin by saying, and I should have promoted this at the beginning. I'm the co-editor of a book coming out in a couple of months, assuming there's anyone left to buy it, called Teaching and Learning Mathematics Online. And when we put together the call for proposals, I begged for a chapter on typing math, and we got nothing back on it. And that's because typing mathematics is not easy, even if you are a mathematician. I mean, when I am sending an email to somebody, I'll type in, kind of faux LaTeX, and, $, \beta equals 5x. I mean, I'm making something up here, right? $, and I expect that the other person's going to know what that means. I can't expect my students to know what that means. And if they don't know what it means, they can't create that sort of thing either. Now, for my students, I have held to the rule, if I can read it, I can grade it. And so many times they will type something out in Word that looks vaguely correct. You can, even trying to get, f equals x squared, out is not something you can really do in Word very easily. I've had sub-students who actually did submit things that were formatted correctly because they used the Word formula editor. I've had one student, the student who knew R, who would also type LaTeX at me, and that was fine. But the thing about it is, and this seemed novel, I guess, back in 2010, the first time I said it, if I can see it, I can grade it, is I told like a student the very first time I was teaching, when they were asking me, how do I get this to you? I said, write it down and take a cell phone picture. And this was 2010, so maybe there weren't quite cameras on every phone yet, but this student had one, and it hit them like a ton of bricks that they could do this. So I think that and that is kind of the dominant way my students end up sending me their assignments as cell phone pictures. Even today with there's an app called Office Lens, which creates scans using a cell phone camera, and it does that by doing by re-registering the document so it's squared against the frame, and no matter what angle you take it at, it comes out hopefully looking reasonably correct. It's not perfect, but it gets the job done, and it's good enough. And it is easier for students to handwrite something and submit that, take the picture and submit it, versus trying to type it. So that's how, I would like to, I hope that my students can just get me something. Like I said, if I can read it, I can grade it. I had other students turn things in which were, they solved the problem as a formula in Excel, and that's fine, because I can look and see that they did it correctly and there's a right answer, and I can see how they got there. That also gets the job done. I can read it, therefore I can grade it. It would be nice if we could develop a standard for communicating mathematics in a, for lack of a better way of putting it, a typesetting free environment, plain text format. But that would end up being basically LaTeX typed in, with somebody just, sorry, some of the questions just got sent to me was clearly not meant to be sent to me. Sorry. It's okay, Monica, we all have our off days. But if we ended up doing that kind of standard for typing mathematics at a text, we would have basically recreated LaTeX anyway. Now, Monica has sent me what she intended to send me, which is 3 websites. One is idroo, idroo.com, math.com, and mathcha.com, mathcha.com. And it says that these are fairly easy for students to type math in. And, there's that. There's also Desmos. There is, you can use GeoGebra. You can use Wolfram Alpha if you're really clever. In fact, there are times I've sent solutions to students as Wolfram Alpha problems. Just because I can type it in, let Wolfram Alpha solve it, and then give them the answer. And Mina's now sending out those links. So I think that there's there are a lot of tools out there. Our lack of standardization is a problem. Not all of them quite work the same way. One of the nice things about, for instance, Desmos is if you're sitting there and typing into it, and you're typing LaTeX-like into it, for instance, you type x, caret x, 2, you'll get x squared, as one would expect. But, it's not perfect. I think that those are all ways to communicate. I've had students send me screenshots of Desmos before. I don't think I've ever gotten GeoGebra before, but to each their own. I've seen other things. Had students submit things that were photographs of their TI calculator showing an answer. It's however they can get it to you. Now, I think one of the things we could do is, and one of the things I've wanted to do, and 10 years in, I still haven't done it, is start dedicating the first week to communicating mathematics in that sort of environment. It's not been a high priority. I should make it a high priority, but that just hasn't happened because there's so many other things going on at the beginning of the semester. And developing it has not been a key thing, especially when there are so many other things I've got to get my students develop. Actually, the biggest problem I have with my students is about their inappropriate use of rounding. So, that's always been the thing that I hammer on the first week of class rather than, communicating math properly. But that's a real issue. I think that we need to figure out better. Are there any other questions? We actually have a full hour for questions now. If anybody wants to share ideas, I mean, we want to share ideas. So if you have something to contribute that's not a question, as professors are often want to do, please feel free to do that. There's no reason to frame it as a question. Just share your idea. And Mina, do you want to unmute yourself so you can jump in?
Yeah, I would like to firstly thank you very much for introducing us to assessment and evaluation in an online format. At the meantime that you were presenting, I was taking care of technology. Yeah, having our webinar online on Facebook, and it was a good challenge for me. It was the first time. So I'm sorry if I was not able to respond to the questions as they were pops up because of all these technical issues. So thank you so much. There was, I think I've typed one of those websites by mistake. So that is idroo.com. And what is the other one? Monica, would you like me to make you unmute so you could talk with everyone? Monica? Okay, great.
I'm pretty sure I know who Monica is, and she'd be a great person to talk on some of this. But she also brings up here, one of the ways she's managed discussion, James Howard is requesting remote control of your screen. That's weird because I am James Howard. Are you? I don't even understand. Hold on, I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'm going to see. Oh my God, I forgot I was on Mars. And see here, I've now totally missed here with my green screen too. Anyway, she brings up again here these ideas about helping with discussion, and we should have a full hour-long presentation in a few weeks on discussion. And Monica, if you want to lead that.
Oh yeah, so I guess I'll just somebody had asked about how you get students to type with math because they don't know LaTeX. So the idrew.com has drop-down buttons that they can click on the symbols that they want. If they don't know the LaTeX, the mathcha.io, also the students can draw the symbol, and then it calculates, or it figures out what LaTeX is supposed to go there. And mathim.com is like a chat window that has buttons that they can click that will produce the symbols that they need. So those are all three that I've used this semester when we jumped online, and the students managed to adapt to each one of those. They have their advantages and disadvantages. Unfortunately, there's not one size fits all for what all I want to do. But anyway, those were the three sites. And earlier on when you were doing the slides on discussion, you said that you had these two kind of formats for discussion posts that you typically see, the problem of the week and the, can't remember what the other one was, but one that I tried out this last couple of weeks that seems to be very good. Oh, it looks like you have, so then anyway, the three main points of, it's a 3-2-1, so three main ideas from the reading, or I actually have the students summarize the last lecture, 2 questions that they still have about that material, and one question that kind of goes beyond, it's not, it's a question for the author or to show some sort of curiosity on the topic beyond what was presented. So the students can't just say, I don't understand how to do X. They actually have to think about, like, why are we studying X? What would be the next thing I would want to learn, type of thing. And then the students actually had pretty fruitful discussions on consolidating their main points and coming up with 3 main ideas that the entire class then agreed on. So that was just a suggestion to add to the conversation. That's all I have.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I think, Monica, you're volunteering to do a session on on discussion then, is what you're saying, right?
I've only done that. But yeah, well, we can talk later about how I might contribute. I'm new to most of this too, so thanks. I'll go ahead and mute.
We are all new in this platform moving online. I think this is not only you. That's why we gathered here to answer our questions or even find some solutions that may not be even the best ones. But yeah, that's a great discussion to have and share our own experience that how we are tackling those problems. I think we have another question for you, James, about online rubrics, if there is any different from in-person rubric or.
Well, I think that, well, yes and no, right? Because part of, if, for instance, especially with something like discussion, because you have to set a deadline for when students participate. And I find that participation is drastically different in the online environment versus in person. For instance, in person, I think that, first of all, I hate grading participation in person because I find that some students are going to be just fine sitting in the back, not saying a word. Now, the thing is, figuring out which students will be like that ahead of time is difficult. But, at some point I have to trust that the students know themselves, right? It's a nice thing about teaching at the college level is that at some point you can give the students responsibility for themselves. But for grading participation, obviously it has to be different in an online environment because we tend not to grant that exception. We tend to have requirements of participation. For instance, if assuming you're on a Monday through Sunday week, where Sunday's the end of the week for your online class, students have to have their first thing done by Tuesday or by Thursday typically, and then any responses done by Sunday. And that's done to give students enough time, to give other students enough time to respond to what a student is to what their fellow students are saying. So I think that you have those issues with timing become an issue, and then you also have some things because it tends to be written where you frame your rubric differently. It's about how the idea is communicated in a written format versus instead, in participation, how well did they handle discussion in a verbal format? So those are necessarily different. With a test, I don't necessarily, for homework, for instance, I don't see a difference between homework in an online environment and homework in an in-person classroom in the way you would approach grading it, because obviously in both cases, the student obviously either gets the answer right or wrong and has to follow a set number of steps and shows their work and shows the right steps and so on. So I think that it depends on whether or not the aspect is unique to the online classroom. So that is how I would frame the rubric differences. If there's a part of your classroom which is not your online classroom, which is does not carry over exactly like it would into a physical classroom, then yes. Now the other question becomes, what parts of those online classrooms do not have a physical analog too? That's where you start to get into rubric development problems that are where you have to break new ground. And part of the issue, I don't see that as being a huge issue because tools like Blackboard, Distance to Learn, etc., are all built around mimicking an online classroom rather than trying to build the online classroom of the future. So, like I said, there's a lot more answers than there are, or a lot more questions than there are answers to a lot of this stuff, because even though, like I said, I've done this for 10 years, the reason I started putting together the book 3 years ago is because I said to myself, I've been doing this a while and I still feel like I don't know what I'm doing here. Maybe if I can get a bunch of authors together to tell me how I can do better, that would be great. And they did. It was great. It's a great book, and I'm quite excited to see it come out. But I think we all have pieces of this puzzle, and that's ultimately what prompted Mina to put together this series. Is let's put the puzzle together together rather than separately.
Thank you. We have another question that I'm willing to answer. We have a question from Garrett that in an effort to, through cheating, they are considered using a timed exam, but how we accommodate students with identified with special needs. I know that Garrett is using Canvas, and I know that we have a quiz option there, Garrett. I'm using the same platform, and there is an option in Canvas that you can extend the time for specific students. For example, when your exam is timed for 2 hours, you can expand the time for double or 3 times based on whatever accommodation that your student may need. And also you were able to open the test for the student who were not able to take the test on that day for whatever reason, a day after or any other time that you would like to. So
and that's so in my own experiences, I've never done the time testing in my undergraduate classes. And let me explain. At the University of Maryland global campus, I basically get a class in a box and said and told go teach this. I then make a handful of changes, but nothing substantial. We don't do time tests, so I get an accommodation letter occasionally, and there's nothing to follow up on because my students get a week to do it no matter what. Now, one of the things that, and I think that this is worth bringing up here about accommodations in particular, is that because of the fact that this semester is so heavily disrupted. I mean, I tell my students, I've literally just sent an email to my students in both my classes saying, all the rules are broken. We are, let's get through this together. There's no, and so for instance, especially with undergrads, I do have a bit of a reputation for being a bit hard on them about deadlines. And this term I've just had to not do that because you can't. I mean, I've had students who are themselves in the hospital due to COVID-19 who are taking care of elderly relatives who have it, who are one person had a child with it. It's been, so, with respect to accommodations, and I realize that with respect to accommodations, we do mean, the standard disability accommodations that we occasionally get these letters for. But at the same time, this term, all accommodations are kind of, automatic. I've had students email me saying, hey, is it okay if I turn something in? I don't care when you turn it in. Just turn it in at some point. I think that this semester we all have to be far more flexible than we're used to being.
I would like to share what I've learned from one of our colleagues about assessment of a certain topic within the current situation. So I believe one of the approach that he was following was about what if we give the student certain topic. Let's say I want my student understand X and Y and Z, and then ask them to prove to us in any way that they can that they have learned this. It could be about like modeling, mathematical modeling. It could be about creating a video that shows how they are solving problem using this model. So give them an option, not only in terms of doing a test. Of course, we can give them a traditional test as well, but also accommodate their needs in a way that they could submit their work in different formats. What do you say about that, James? Do you have any?
Right. So within even the limited confines of homework, where I said I use the if I can read it, I can grade it rule, you would not believe the wide breadth of options I have things sent to me in. Word, Excel, PowerPoint, scans as PDFs, scans as JPEGs, scans as JPEGs that are upside down, scans in file formats I didn't know existed. Like, what? Why? You know, it's so, and that's within a fairly constrained framework. If you're going to offer your students these, you know, the any way you can, I have to admire that. I think that's fantastic. I don't know if you're quite ready yet for what you're going to get. You'll get YouTube videos. Okay, it's easy enough to deal with. You're going to get PowerPoint presentations. You're going to get, and I think that the bulk of it will be YouTube and PowerPoint presentations, or a Zoom video of a guy sitting on Mars. But you know, those are the easy ones to deal with. Some students are going to find some very peculiar ways to submit things, and as long as you're ready for the unusual stuff, go nuts.
I had a student who had some, he was visually impaired, and he was really struggle during the test and the quizzes time to type everything, because the cursor was jumping all around the word, and he was not able to find where it is. One of the things that he always wished to have was how if he could submit his work as a voice file, like record his voice, explain how it would be solved, or use a tactile graphing option. So I think being that flexible with other students in a way that they can submit their work will help many of them.
Right, and the thing is, I think that the audio recording is no big deal, right? In an online environment, but the tactile solution, I could not imagine how that would work in an online format, because obviously we don't quite yet have the ability to transmit touch over the internet.
he could, because it was for him, but we could see how that looked like. It wasn't a big deal. So he could create the tactile format of the graph and then take a photo and send. We were sending to the professor. So.
Oh, okay, that makes more sense then.
Yeah.
I didn't want. I kind of foresaw that, but I didn't want to assume that that's how that was working there. Monica keeps sending me stuff about the 3-2-1 discussion questions, thinking she can get out of us conning her into giving a presentation. What other fun experiences has anyone had? What other interesting experiences has anyone had?
I might pose a question here for all our colleagues that is about, yes, is about, I forgot my question.
Well, while you're thinking about that, I did want to bring up one particular point, which is, as we continue to go through the transition process, I think that we should remember that we should continue sharing ideas here. And one of the things that we have on our agenda is setting up some sort of place for exchanging ideas, whether that's like a wiki or a blog or something. We're not sure how it's going to look yet, because we're doing this all by the seat of our pants. So if we would like to be able to do that and basically build a resource for all of us. So now, Monica, I can actually send you my assessment rubric after. Monica, it's Monica Van Durian over there, right? Yeah. Okay. So I'll send you my assessment. I've been through like 3 or 4 different versions, because every time I think I've got it right, I decide it's terrible and start again. Right now, I just use a simple 4-point scale where, and I can send you the specifics, but 0 is nothing meaningful was written, which occasionally happens. 1 is you did a thing and it was kind of relevant. Or you got the right answer, but I have no idea how you did it. I mean, you just put down 7 or you know, whatever the correct answer was, but just staring at it with no context, then, you know, okay, you got the right answer. Now tell me how. One of the things I've encountered, and I'm sure that this is common for all of us, is students, no matter how many times you remind them, will not show their work. 2 is kind of that bulk category of you did a thing and it was good try. 3 is well done, some sort of small arithmetic error. You know, you flip signs or something like that. You know, something that's clearly not a systemic problem, you just messed up something in the mechanics. And then, you know, 4 is well done. You know, you right answer, you showed me how you did it. It's not the best. I don't think it's the worst. It's the latest iteration. I've previously used multi-category rubrics for discussion, but I find that they're just not helpful in any meaningful way because of the difficulty of grading discussions overall. A simpler rubric, I find, helps. But that's just me.
So it sounds like it's a very obvious, you know, like it does sound.
What do you mean by single point rubric? Hold on, let me actually unmute you. Yeah, go ahead and speak.
Single point rubric. Something that was recommended to me by the Center for Teaching and Learning at Western University. Write up what it is. I just sent you a link there. It's
A little worried about the cult of pedagogy.
Yeah. This is just like a Google result I found that had a good explanation for what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, just the name.
Yeah,
but go ahead and explain.
So it's basically, instead of having a matrix of basically a 4, like say a 4x4 thing where you have in each row you have the changing description. You just write over, say, in the middle or on the left, here are the things that is, if you meet the standards, here's where you're at. And then you say, okay, if you get 1 point, that means completely unsatisfactory. 2 points means it's somewhat satisfactory. 3 points means you met the standards. 4 points means you've exceeded the standards.
Yeah.
And then you have room for like feedback.
Right. And here, let me pull up, I'm actually trying to get a copy of it up for me. Here we go. Discussion. Is this how we do this? Yeah. So hold on, let me share my screen and I can show this. So this is it right here, and this is actually the editor for it inside D2L. This is just it. It's not particularly exciting. It is, you know, a single dimension. And yeah, you either exceeded expectations, you know, a correct solution and an appropriate strategy are shown or explained, and a solution is shown with a correct label or description if necessary. And I'm pretty sure I copied these descriptions from something.
This is not quite what they meant by the single point rubric, because it would really, because this is a single dimension. It would be more like you have like 4, say, dimensions or like 5 dimensions, but you've only put the description for the satisfactory column in.
Oh, interesting. Oh, I gotta ponder that. I don't know. Can't hurt. Yeah. I don't know. I've never seen this before, and I'd like to play with it. You know, it's the worst that could have happened.
Yeah.
Does anybody else have any questions or experiences to share? So I'm not hearing anything, and we've been going for about 90 minutes. I know that Mina was hoping for 2 hours here. I think I missed the beginning of your presentation. We'll get the Facebook page mailed out to everybody.
I would say, sorry, because we had an incident during the during our webinar, perhaps Facebook will take off our video, but I will edit the video and post it in our YouTube channel. Let me send you the YouTube channel address.
Yeah, there's got to be some way we can edit that out. Yeah, we'll have a copy up with sometime tomorrow, I think, is the goal.
Yeah, because it takes a little bit of time to edit the file.
Cool. So with that, I think we should call it a day. I want to wish everyone good luck in your transitions right now. And Mina's posting our survey. Please go ahead and answer it if you haven't. Stay healthy, and don't do anything I wouldn't do.
And the name of our YouTube channel is STEM Remote Learning from Crisis to Possibilities. If you want to search it out. Thank you very much, James. It was great. I really enjoyed, and I hope that everybody else also have enjoyed the presentation.
I do hope people at least got something out of it.
Yeah.
So thank you all. And Mina, I'm going to turn it over to you for closing down.
Okay, thank you everyone, and have a great day.